Senhora Presidente da Assembleia Geral,
Madam President of the General Assembly, Annalena Baerbock, Mr. Secretary-General Antonio Guterres, dear heads of state and government, representatives of member states gathered here. This should be a moment of celebration for the United Nations. Created at the end of the war, the UN symbolizes the highest expression of the aspiration for peace and prosperity. Today, however, the ideals that inspired its founders in San Francisco are threatened as never before in history. Multilateralism stands at a new crossroads. The authority of this organization is under question. We are witnessing the consolidation of an international disorder marked by repeated concessions to the politics of power. Attacks on sovereignty, arbitrary sanctions, and unilateral interventions are becoming the rule. There is an evident parallel between the crisis of multilateralism and the weakening of democracy. Authoritarianism strengthens when we omit ourselves in the face of arbitrariness. When the international community hesitates in defending peace, sovereignty, and the law, the consequences are tragic. All over the world, anti-democratic forces try to subjugate institutions and suffocate freedoms. They glorify violence, exalt ignorance, act as physical and digital militias, and stifle the press. Even under unprecedented attack, Brazil chose to resist and defend its democracy, reconquered 40 years ago by its people after 2 decades of dictatorial governments. There is no justification for unilateral and arbitrary measures against our institutions and our economy. Aggression against the independence of the judiciary is unacceptable. This interference in domestic affairs relies on the assistance of a far-right movement submissive to and nostalgic for old hegemonies. False patriots publicly plan and promote actions against Brazil. There can be no pacification with impunity. Just a few days ago, and for the first time in 525 years of our history, a former head of state was convicted for attempting against the democratic rule of law. He was investigated, indicted, tried, and held accountable for his acts in a meticulous process. He had full rights of defense, a prerogative that dictatorships deny their victims. Before the eyes of the world, Brazil sent a message to all aspiring autocrats and those who support them. Our democracy and our sovereignty are non-negotiable. We shall remain an independent nation and a free people, under no kind of tutelage. Robust democracies go beyond the electoral ritual. Their vitality requires reducing inequalities and guaranteeing basic rights: food, security, work, housing, education, and health. Democracy fails when women earn less than men or die at the hands of partners and relatives. It loses when it shuts its doors and blames migrants for the world's woes. Poverty is as much an enemy of democracy as extremism. That is why we proudly received from FAO the confirmation that Brazil has once again left the hunger map this year, in 2025. But in the world, there are still 670 million hungry people, and about 2.3 billion face food insecurity. The only war that everyone can win is the war we fight against hunger and poverty. That is the goal of the global alliance we launched at the G20, which already has the support of 103 countries. The international community must rethink its priorities, reduce spending on wars, increase development aid, ease external debt services of the poorest countries, especially in Africa, and set minimum global taxation standards so that the super-rich pay more taxes than workers. Democracy is also measured by its ability to protect families and children. Digital platforms bring possibilities of connection never before imagined, but they have been used to sow intolerance, misogyny, xenophobia, and disinformation. The internet cannot be a lawless land. It is up to public authorities to protect the most vulnerable. To regulate is not to restrict freedom of expression, but to ensure that what is already illegal in the real world is treated the same way in the virtual environment. Attacks on regulation serve to cover up vested interests and provide shelter for crimes such as fraud, human trafficking, pedophilia, and assaults against democracy. The Brazilian parliament has rightly rushed to address this problem. With pride, I promulgated last week one of the most advanced laws in the world for the protection of children and adolescents in the digital realm. We also submitted to the National Congress a bill to foster competition in digital markets and to encourage the installation of sustainable data centers. To mitigate the risks of artificial intelligence, we are committed to building multilateral governance in line with the Global Digital Compact, approved in this plenary last year. Ladies and gentlemen, in Latin America and the Caribbean, we are experiencing a moment of growing polarization and instability. Keeping the region as a zone of peace has always been and remains our priority. We are a continent free of weapons of mass destruction, without ethnic or religious conflicts. It is concerning to equate crime with terrorism. The most effective way to combat drug trafficking is cooperation to curb money laundering and limit the arms trade. The use of lethal force in situations that do not constitute armed conflict is equivalent to executing people without trial. Other parts of the planet have already witnessed interventions that caused more damage than what they sought to avoid, with serious humanitarian consequences. The path of dialogue must not be closed in Venezuela. Haiti has the right to a future free of violence. And it is unacceptable that Cuba be listed as a state sponsor of terrorism. On the conflict in Ukraine, we all already know there will be no military solution. The recent meeting in Alaska awakened hope for a negotiated path. We must build avenues for a realistic solution, one that takes into account the legitimate security concerns of all sides. The African Initiative and the Group of Friends for Peace, created by China and Brazil, can help promote dialogue. No situation is more emblematic of the disproportionate and illegal use of force than Palestine. The terrorist attacks carried out by Hamas are indefensible from any angle, but nothing, absolutely nothing, justifies the ongoing genocide in Gaza. There, under tons of rubble, lie tens of thousands of innocent women and children. Buried too are international humanitarian law and the myth of Western ethical superiority. This massacre would not be happening without the complicity of those who could have prevented it. In Gaza, hunger is wielded as a weapon of war, and the forced displacement of populations is practiced with impunity. I want to express my admiration for the Jews who, inside and outside Israel, oppose this collective punishment. The Palestinian people risk disappearing. They will only survive as an independent state integrated into the international community. This is the solution upheld by more than 150 UN members and reaffirmed here yesterday in this very chamber, but obstructed by a single veto. It is regrettable that President Mahmoud Abbas was prevented by the host country from taking the Palestinian seat at this historic moment. The spread of this conflict to Lebanon, Syria, Iran, and Qatar fuels an unprecedented arms escalation. Ladies and gentlemen, bombs and nuclear weapons will not protect us from the climate crisis. The year 2024 was the warmest on record. COP30 in Belém, Brazil, will be the COP of truth. It will be the time for world leaders to prove the seriousness of their commitment to the planet. Without the full picture of nationally determined contributions, the so-called NDCs, we will walk blindfolded toward the real abyss. Brazil committed to reducing its emissions by between 59% and 67%, covering all greenhouse gases in every sector of the economy. Developing nations face climate change at the same time they fight other challenges. Meanwhile, rich countries enjoy a standard of living built over 200 years of emissions. Demanding greater ambition and greater access to resources and technologies is not a question of charity, it is simply a matter of justice. The rush for critical minerals essential to the energy transition cannot repeat the predatory logic of past centuries. In Belém, the world will know the reality of the Amazon. Brazil has already cut deforestation in half in the region over the past 2 years. Eradicating it requires guaranteeing dignified living conditions for millions of inhabitants. Promoting sustainable development is the aim of the Tropical Forests Forever Fund, which Brazil intends to launch to reward countries that keep their forests standing. The time has come to move from the negotiation phase to the implementation stage. The world owes much to the regime created by the Climate Convention, but it is necessary to bring the fight against climate change to the heart of the UN, so it receives the attention it deserves. A council linked to the General Assembly, with legitimacy to monitor commitments, would bring coherence to climate action. This is a crucial step toward a broader reform of the organization, including an enlarged Security Council in both categories of its members. Few areas have regressed as much as the multilateral trading system. Unilateral measures have turned into dead letters fundamental principles such as the most favored nation clause. They disrupt value chains and cast the global economy into a pernicious spiral of high prices and stagnation. It is urgent to refound the WTO on modern and flexible bases. Ladies and gentlemen, this year the world has lost 2 exceptional personalities, the former Uruguayan president, Pepe Mujica, and our dear Pope Francis. Both embodied, like no one else, the best humanist values. Their lives intersected with the 8 decades of the UN's existence. Were he still among us, he would probably use this platform to remind us that authoritarianism, environmental degradation, and inequality are not inevitable. That the only defeated are those who cross their arms in resignation. That we can overcome the false prophets and oligarchs who exploit fear and monetize hate. And that tomorrow is built with daily choices, and it takes courage to act to transform it. In the future that Brazil envisions, There is no place for the re-addition of ideological rivalries or spheres of influence. Confrontation is not inevitable. We need leadership with clarity of vision, that understands the international UN is not a zero-sum game. The 21st century will be increasingly multipolar. To remain peaceful, it cannot cease to be multilateral. Brazil attaches growing importance to the European Union, the African Union, ASEAN, CELAC, BRICS, and the G20. The voice of the Global South must be respected and heard. The UN today has almost 4 times more members than the 51 present at its founding. Our historic mission is to make it once again a bearer of hope and a promoter of equality and peace, sustainable development, diversity, and tolerance. May God bless us all, and thank you very much.